Tom, would you like to start?
Welcome, everyone. This is Sephardic World, brought to you by the Sephardic Genealogical Society, which at the moment is basically David and me. As always, we thank our patrons who support us, and many of them are here today with us. And we welcome our viewers, on YouTube. And today we have Julian Land, and he is a household name on Sephardic World. I had the pleasure of meeting him and his lovely wife Sylvia in Amsterdam 10 years ago, I think. And he was then already researching the Baruch Lousada family, which is the subject of this evening. David.
Thank you. Really, we thought to split the discussion into two halves. First of all, to actually talk about the process of writing a book about Sephardic genealogy, and then to discuss the actual research itself. Excuse me. We're very keen that that more people should follow Julian's example in writing a book. Because there really are, when you look, there's not that many family biographies on Western Sephardim, and it's such a huge subject, and it would be a great shame if all of our research goes to waste. So Julian, to start, I mean, when did you first envisage writing a book?
I guess, David, it was only a year ago, and I credit my wife Sylvia for this, really, because having seen what I had been doing and having participated in a number of the family holidays, which were all slanted towards touching on the history of the Baruch Lousadas, she noticed that my list of references was something like 400, and she said to me, well, you should write something. I think she was thinking something academic, but I'm too old to be doing theses at this stage, but I thought that something which would, in a sense, commemorate the activities of the last 10 years and how it happened would be the right thing to do. So in the middle of a house move, in order to take relief from putting things in boxes, I applied myself to writing something. And I've christened it a coffee table book because it is not strictly an academic tome, but I have tried to make it accessible to people on all ends, all parts of the spectrum. I've put a lot of effort into an index of names and places, which I thought would make it useful academically, but it's also got a number of sort of stories and anecdotes which are more accessible to the, so we say, a more local, less sophisticated audience that there is there. So, so it was only very recently, and it was thanks to my wife, really, that something emerged, not quite what she anticipated, but this is what I felt like doing.
No, that's great, and I think the personal anecdotes are really interesting. I'm actually trying to do the same thing for my own family, which is why I'm kind of interested. And it's, yeah, I think a long sort of dry tome is not necessarily what people want, because they also want to get a feel of who the people were. And in doing your research, because obviously I kindly sent Ton and me sort of preprints of the book, you were starting off by essentially just spamming anyone in Australia with the Lousada surname. Is that effectively your strategy to start?
Yes, David. I must say, though, that I guess in many families you've got a vestigial memory of the past history of the family. There was something that masqueraded as a family tree, which we were always aware of. But in a sense, that was the starting point. But that was starting from when I was about 20. I was aware of this family tree. But I have to say that I discovered that it had about 100 errors in it. So as a family tree, it is, shall we say, completely useless. But it had the one central idea that there was something interesting going on. But yes, to start with, I looked in the white pages or the equivalent, the online equivalent, found all the Lousadas in Australia, and there were only about 15 of them. In that sense, I was lucky. And I got one response from Sydney the next day and one response from Melbourne the day after. And the local Australian experience went from there. There are a lot of surprises even in the Australian component of this. So, but yes, that was the way I started in Australia.
No, I'm curious because I mean, obviously, I have the surname. I belong to the community, so it was sort of natural for me. I'm just curious because this is something we see again and again, that obviously people have sort of thousands and thousands of ancestors, but it seems to me they often just close in on the Sephardic ones, which you say in your book. I'm just sort of curious to know why that lineage rather than I'm guessing there's some English lineage that can probably be sort of traced back to the, if not Doomsday Book, medieval period perhaps.
Well, look, it was so intrinsically interesting, potentially. I thought, why would the name of what turns out to be a small Portuguese town, why would that surname appear in a obscure Victorian country town? I guess other people in Australia might have the same feeling. There are Italian names in obscure towns, German names, and so on. But in my case, it was the name of a Portuguese town. And I also detected, in a way that wasn't there in any other strand of my history, that there was a mute, but a tangible sense of pride in what had happened in the past, without any clarity as to how, why, or where. For example, the family thought they were Spanish. The family had no idea that they were Jewish. And I guess you're right, it's an arbitrary choice. I also felt that if there were any other family historians in the group of family members represented by, say, my great-grandparents, then those English antecedents would have been more likely to have been researched than the Lousadas. I was aware that certainly my close cousins would have had no appetite for tackling something like this. And so, look, it was a very natural thing for me to do. The fact that I became obsessed with Sephardic history and the, shall we say, the modern historical movements that Western Sephardim is mixed up with and contributed to, that then became a secondary, shall we say, interest and obsession. But the start was that feeling of history and hidden pride that existed right at the beginning.
Yeah, obsession seems to be quite common, quite a common theme, because it is interesting because the Western Sephardim was such a tiny community that they get such attention. When you decided to write the book, I mean, First of all, I mean, how were you doing it? I mean, were you just doing it in sort of Microsoft Word, or did you have some specialist software, or were you just like old school writing on paper or cards, or how did you plan it to start, I guess?
Well, it was just done in chapter by chapter in Microsoft Word, I guess it's true that when you create something like this, in some sense you have a mental picture of what the whole will look like before you start. I always think that a sculptor knows what's inside the piece of marble and only has to reveal it. It was a little like that. I had a mental picture of what each chapter would look like, and it was simply a matter of putting down the words. Not quite as simple as that, but that's really what I did, chapter by chapter.
How long do you reckon the whole work took you to do? Is that possible to estimate?
Well, elapsed time was during the house move when I was packing boxes. So it would have been maybe 3 to 4 months of total elapsed time, maybe 5 months, maybe 4 months elapsed time.
How many hours a day do you reckon you were working on?
On average, it would only have been 2 hours a day.
Yeah. So it's not it's not an impossible task, I guess. Is the
oh well, of course, having the website in the background, where all the I mean, I know where every piece of data on the website is. Many people looking at the website don't know where anything is, and it takes a while to learn your way around it. I think one of the audience described my website as a blackberry bush, very hard to find your way around. But I was lucky; I knew where everything on the website was, so I did not have to do any research other than look on the website. So that made the exercise of writing coffee table book very much an exercise in writing alone, and not much in the way of research.
In actually writing, though, did you discover anything new? That's to say, did you see any particular patterns in family history you hadn't noticed before?
There were some. Sometimes I came across an interesting facet which I had not paid much weight to, and I thought, for example, the small story of Abigail Baruch Lousada from London, the first daughter of the, shall we say, cornerstone of the Anglo Jewry in the late 1700s, Isaac Baruch Lousada. She was an eminent mathematician.
Yeah.
She was the first to translate Diophantos from the Greek. And when you think about that, you realize a number of things about the milieu in which she grew up, including a very comprehensive education, even the ability to be educated like that for a woman. The story in itself, while interesting, tells you a lot about the, shall we say, the elevated social status that the Baruch Lousadas managed to achieve in London in the second half of the 1700s. So that story I expanded much more than it appears on the website, even though there aren't many details. It was an example of how I changed the emphasis to bring out an aspect of the history, I guess.
What sort of book would your wife have liked to read?
Look, John, I think she was surprised. She was expecting an 800-word thesis, 800-page thesis, but instead we have a slim volume with lots of pictures and with a little bit of a travelogue involving her in it. So I think she was quite surprised. She is, however, even supportive at this stage. We had a Jewish a tradesman with a Jewish name involved, I think, in a bathroom renovation, and she got talking to him and asked him whether he was Sephardic or Ashkenazi, and ended up giving a copy of the book to him, and his mother had written the family histories. They were both Sephardic and Ashkenazi. I got in return a copy of 2 books that the tradesman's mother had written. Naturally, I poured through those books to see whether there were interconnecting links, and indeed there were some names in common, but no, shall we say, directly visible family contacts. But that's the sort of exercise that Sylvia will engage in. So yes, she has accepted it for what it is, Todd.
No, but I like the idea of that you included the travelogue and the personal stuff, which obviously wouldn't have been in an academic study, because I think, you know, it puts you into the story, and hopefully in 200 years time, whoever is reading can also have a feel particularly of you. I had my late father write a memoir about the family, which frankly was sort of libelous, but really, really interesting, because he wrote down what he really thought about everybody. And
it's not printable then.
I'm sorry?
So it's not printable then.
It has been shared with in the immediate family, but not beyond. But no, I mean the point I'm making is that whilst we're all hopefully operating to high standards, I don't think anymore that we need, with full respect to people like Bruce or at universities, I don't think we necessarily have to get a certificate from somebody to prove our worth. And and so the reason obviously that I wanted to have this part of the discussion is there's about a dozen people here who could and I hope should be also thinking about writing family history. Of course, not just about the Sephardic family, but everything. I don't consider myself particularly old, but I know, for example, that my Manchester great-grandparents were the first in Manchester, England, were the first Jewish family there to own a car. And I have my father's recollection of their first telephone, and even myself, now obviously there's people who don't know what a fax machine is and things like that. I think it's really, really valuable that we write these things down, not just for our family, but for the wider community. And perhaps so a bit later we can return to the technique of both writing and also publishing, which actually is something I know a little bit about. But Tom, do you want to discuss the actual meat of the meat of the book?
I'm curious about all these travels. Did you visit every place wherever Lousada lived, or did you limit yourself?
Ton, I was very much compromised by family circumstances. There are some places that I mean, Australia is a long way away, and the trip to Europe is over 24 hours in an aircraft. It's not something that you would, at this age, do lightly. So I needed to go to places that are, shall we say, acceptable from the family point of view. For example, I would have liked to have spent a lot of time in Rouen. The archives of the Maritime in Rouen are worth looking at. French records are so, shall we say, disparate that you need to spend time. I do have some French, so at some stage I may spend time in Rouen, possibly Bordeaux also, because there are a lot of loose ends in the French dimension. But I never spent time in Rouen. I would like to spend months there. Livorno is an example also. until the French book on the Jewish marriages in Livorno came out, I was thinking I would have to spend months in Livorno, which would have been difficult for me not having Hebrew. So there were places that I didn't visit, or at least not as long as I perhaps could have. An English relative of mine spent time in Barbados, but to my knowledge, in recent times, not many of us have been to Jamaica. I met, as you know, descendants of the Suriname Baruch Lousadas, but I have not been to Suriname, although the 10th cousin, Emil Lousada, his ancestry goes back to Suriname, and I left it at that. Similarly, Curacao, an offshoot from Livorno would be Tunis. There are or were Baruch Lousadas in Tunisia. Probably most of them went to Israel, but I have no contact with them, and I have not been able to spend time in either Israel or Tunisia. So England is a hospitable place to visit. So is Netherlands. So is France, Spain, and Portugal. So yes, it was an arbitrary selection of countries, Tom, not an encyclopedic one. My recent trip to Europe, the 5 weeks I've just come back from, I was very keen, and not directly for Sephardic reasons, I guess, but very keen to go to Vienna, Bratislava, Budapest, and Prague, but without much in the way of research. I simply wanted to, shall we say, walk where they walked, if you know what I mean. And I do think there was Sephardic links into those four cities. So I've had to try to make my trips only tangentially relevant to the business of family history, but it made for a very interesting family holidays.
Yeah, back to your book. How did the Lousadas end up in Australia? What was the occasion? Have you been?
You know, as with many family histories, somebody, in this case, my mother's pair of uncles, did some work, which, you know, people only look at a section of the total, and in the case of Sephardic histories, you have to look at multiple countries, which disqualifies most people to begin with. But within Australia, the key event was a very, very surprising one. My great-grandfather, Edward Charles Lousada, arrived in Australia in late 1871, and even piecing together his story and the towns that he lived in, because he moved a lot within Australia, that was interesting. But to my huge surprise, not only did he have two brothers who were already here, which I knew nothing about, and most of my family knew nothing about. The event of his arrival in Australia contained a huge surprise all by itself, simply because of those hitherto unknown brothers. But it turned out that he had many cousins, particularly from the Barrow, shall we say, subgroup of the story, but also Montefiore's and Macatas. And so even within Australia, there was a massive stratum of surprises, and tracing all those links back, shows in a sense that the seeds of the family story were actually all in Australia, but you had to trace them all back, not just the particular family, the Baruch Lousadas, that I focused on.
Are all the Lousadas in Australia related to each other?
Probably, Ton, but But because in Australia we have massive interactions with Latin America, there are many Chileans in Australia, also Argentinians. There are many people from Philippines in Australia. There are many who've, well, there are not many, but there are some who are, I mean, the Lousada name exists in Australia with them. Not many of them, none of which I managed to pick up. But I think it's fair to say that all the people with our spelling of the Lousada name were related, yes.
But have you been able to find out what the reason was for their coming to Australia?
The youngest son of my great-grandfather wrote a couple of brief notes for local historical societies. In one of those, suggested that my great-grandfather, who was aged 17 and 18 about at the time he came, he was wanting to maybe study medicine in England, and he wanted to have what is now known as a gap year before he commenced serious study. So possibly a young man wanted opportunity in a different country, thought he'd have a look, and he liked it so much, the informality and casualness of life in Australia. He liked that compared to the stuffy atmosphere of a would-be aristocratic family. I think he had those combination of reasons. The older brothers who were here, I don't know, a sense of adventure maybe. I've never been able to get into the heads of either of the two brothers, one of whom left a trail of accidents all over Australia, and he was, I would say, an individual who's hard to read. The other one was a much more industrious, hardworking person. He became a magistrate, and I guess he probably, in a different way, saw opportunity in Australia as well. Mind you, the magistrate started off life as a publican, Queensland, and eventually ended up living in Victoria. So I think there was a sense of adventure amongst the young men who wanted to do something. And you see this same pattern in a number of their families who came to Australia. They saw opportunity in a European sense, underdeveloped countries.
Running a pub is a very was a very Sephardic thing to do, quite surprisingly. But are any of the current batch of Lousadas that you encountered, are any of them Jewish?
No, in Australia and South Africa, there really was a huge sense of surprise that there was Jewish ancestry. The only Jewish branch of the family is in London. My namesake, Julian Lousada, who was in one of these audiences for one of my talks, made himself known after the talk. And I had several, following that meeting at a Sephardic World meeting, had several long conversations with him, during which he revealed a number of things to do with the Jewish side of the Baruch Lousadas. His father, Sir Anthony Baruch Lousada, he identified strongly as Jewish, although he got support from neither of his wives, one of whom Julian described, that was Julian's mother, described as a communist, and the second one was a New York ballet dancer, neither of whom showed any interest in and was discouraged Sir Anthony's interest in being Jewish. Julian told me that Sir Anthony was envious, very envious of the fact that Julian was able to live a Jewish life, and Julian's second wife was Jewish. Julian identifies in a secular sense, I guess, with being Jewish, but that's there's only, I think, that one strand, David, of people identifying as Jewish.
Yes,
as a result of all my work, I haven't had what you might call a spiritual conversion suddenly being Jewish makes everything make sense. No, that hasn't happened to me. Although I'm left with a core of, shall we say, sympathy, a residual sympathy and empathy for the forebears and what they did, or what they put up with for the sake of their beliefs and also their ethnicity.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very common story.
Yeah. How did you make the connection to England? Was there one of these family trees that you mentioned in the book that you inherited from your mother? Or
Yes, look, Ton, I knew that everybody knew there was family in England, but nobody knew anybody because, in the 1870s and onwards, international travel was not so easy. Now, even though it's a terrible trial, you can get on a plane, subject yourself to 24 hours of torture and be in Europe. But then 6-week minimum, the voyage on a sailing ship didn't encourage travel to and fro. In actual fact, I made contact with the English Baruch Lousadas via South Africa because maybe 20 years ago, I put something on the internet saying I was interested. After about 10 years, or nearly 10 years, a Barrow fourth cousin in South Africa responded. And he'd independently been talking to the Baruch Lousadas in England, not with the name Baruch Lousada. But it was actually via South Africa that I made my first person-to-person contacts with the relatives in England. So, such is the days of the internet connectivity, if I can put it that way.
what was your family like in England? What was their place in English society? What are the families which they did interact? Can you tell us something about that?
They were would-be aristocrats, Tom. I guess for the reasons I put in the book, they acquired wealth and through the 1800s managed to spend it. Very few of them made any money, and they used their money to develop aspirations of social elevation. They saw themselves fairly high in the social strata. First, Emmanuel Baruch Lousada, he was a property developer. He really built Sidmouth in Devon, the south coast of Devon, as a desirable tourist resort, not just for wealthy London Jewish, Sephardic Jews, but for, shall we say, tourists generally. And he was one of the first Jews to own land in England. Didn't really have approval in a sense, but he just did it. And he became so popular locally that local residents were greatly in support. He bequeathed his properties in Sidmouth to a nephew named Emmanuel, and the house in Sidmouth is revered as a local grand house. The residents there are still vehemently supportive of that link with history. I'm not sure they really paid much attention to the fact that he was Jewish, but the house is still there. It's been rebuilt. And in fact, I made the visit to Sidmouth enabled me to make contact with big branch of the English Baruch Lousadas that nobody in Australia had ever heard of. So the story sort of progressed from that first contact. And I guess in answer to your question, I've met very few struggling poor Baruch Lousadas, let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. The Dukes of Lousada, did they belong to your family?
Yes, I know David has been interested in this. In Australia, we saw there were dukes in the family tree. Nobody had any idea what this meant, what magnificent achievements had merited such high honour or anything of this sort. This was an example of their quasi or aristocratic pretensions. I think they saw a title in England as being key to social acceptability, and as a consequence of this, I've spent a bit of time trying to understand how this came about. The reason for it is it's important in terms of Sephardic history is because the dukes had a myth. They were noble Spaniards who somehow ended up in Jamaica before the British capture of Jamaica in 1655, and so there was this alternative history of the Baruch Lousadas potentially there, which wasn't Sephardic at all. It was noble Spanish, but this story, which was propagated, or this confusion, should I say, which was propagated by the early dukes, was a great distraction and a great annoyance, and it had to be dealt with. So I was interested in the dukes, not because I was hoping to have a duke having a link with the aristocracy, but simply because I had to untangle this historical red herring of the Spanish nobility ending up in Jamaica, which of course was pretty unlikely. Jamaica's always been a rough place, at least in historic times.
Yes, it did not make you friends, I suppose.
In England, and here I have to pay my respects to Peter Lousada, who died recently. He and I did spend some time on the golf course at Bedford and Woburn Abbey Golf Course. The Woburn estate is owned by the Duke of Bedfordshire. Peter was close to both the current Duke and his father, helping to run the golf course, in fact. Peter always thought it was amusing to have quasi-dukes in the family, given he was so close to the real dukes. But it was a bit embarrassing for Peter to realise that the Australian Lousadas, thanks to one of the marriages in Australia, the first marriage in Australia, had a marriage link to Duke of Bedfordshire. So the Australian Lousadas were actually by marriage linked to the Dukes of Bedfordshire. Were closer, in fact, than Peter was. I thought that was rather funny. Yeah, enough said.
Yeah, you mentioned Jamaica, and ancestors of yours lived on Barbados and on Suriname, and your stories about those countries and the Lousadas there are endlessly fascinating. It also left me a little bit confused. Did these families living there all belong to one branch? Were they interconnected? Or was it different people coming from different parts of Europe to different colonies?
No, the migration patterns, I guess there were two key ones. The Barbados Lousada stemmed from a man called Baruch Lousada, who was born probably in Madrid, might have been Villaflor in northern Portugal, but he arrived in Barbados in 1659, and a big branch of the Lousada stems from him. There's really only one other branch of the Baruch Lousadas present in the Caribbean, and that they descend from David the Baruch Lousada, son of Isaac, who is the one who first appeared in historical records in Livorno in 1640. His son David was born in 1640 in Livorno, and he grew up, moved to Barbados in 1654, and then to Amsterdam and so on, and the descendants then went to Suriname and Curacao. But so Aaron and David represent the two strands of the Baruch Lousadas who appeared in the Caribbean. This is one of the confusing things, Tom, that the stories of these two individual family branches intertwine a little. They were both in Barbados at the same time, and untangling this has not been easy. thanks to firstly Michael Bass and then the French book on the Jewish marriages in Livorno, I came to realize that there was another, Isaac had a brother, Abraham, in Livorno, and Abraham's descendants appeared in both London, Amsterdam, and Barbados. So I guess that third strand also appears. As I say, untangling how these different family branches intertwine, especially in the Caribbean, was difficult.
Who was Simon Barrow of Bath? How does he fit in with the family?
The Barrows, and I'm trying to get some Y chromosome from the male line Barrows to feed into Adam Brown and Michael Vass's study of Jewish Y chromosomes, because Simon Barrow goes back in the male line, I believe, to Simon Michael Pressburg, who ran the Mint in Vienna in 1705, and I believe they run in the male line to Simon Michael Pressburg, and I think this may well be interesting. But so Simon Barrow of Bath was a key link in the male line descent from Simon Michael Pressburg right through to male line Barrows existing today, including Ed Barrow in Kenya and other Barrows I've met in England. So Simon Barrow was a fascinating figure in his own right. I believe he had plantation interests, but he basically became a gentleman of leisure, devoted himself to politics in Bath, tied to the Isle of Wight. But he has a massive, he has 13 children and a massive lot of descendants. He was a key ancestor of all the people who think of themselves as Barrows today. As I say, he goes back to Livorno and probably before that to Vienna on the Ashkenazi side, and the link with Sephardim happened in, if not Livorno itself, either Geneva, Modena, Milano, somewhere. I haven't found out where the key marriage was, but Simon Barrow of Bath was a fascinating man. I think he was the first, if you like, a very modern man. He thought it very important to get the sons into professions, and so you find many of his sons were very senior army officers in Britain, lawyers, doctors, clergymen. He converted to Christianity after his wife died in 1828. She was unmistakably, unshakably Jewish in both ethnicity and religion. As soon as she died, he converted and then became an English gentleman. So it's hard to, and there are many aspects of him having advanced progressive social instincts. So it's hard not to feel some form of attachment to him. He's a direct ancestor of mine because of the multiple marriages between the Barrows and the Baruch Lousadas, but yes, I feel a little empathy with him.
Oh, when did the story arise that he was also a Lousada by ancestry?
Well, many family histories have unsubstantiated beliefs buried within them, and Barrows always believed that they descended from the Baruch Lousadas, and this belief is inchoate. It's not expressed. They don't know how or why. The Barrow family trees erroneously start from Moses Baruch Lousada, who was well known in London at the time of the resettlement of Jews. He was the first treasurer or gabbai at Bevis Marks in 1663. That family tree was erroneous because Simon Barrow of Bath was born in sorry, his grandfather Simon was born in 1711, but Moses Baruch Lousada died in 1699. So the modern technology for embryo preservation didn't exist at that time, and that family tree was handed down and within the Barrows was clearly erroneous. I have spent some time trying to figure out how the Barrows could have descended from the Baruch Lousadas, and I think it happened either in Livorno or nearby. And I have done with others, with Barrows, a lot of looking at the DNA. It's not absolutely conclusive, but I think it's quite persuasive that the link with the Baruch Lousadas and their descent from the Baruch Lousadas happened in Italy in the Livorno region around about 1709.
And how did you find out that your family came from Villa Flor ultimately?
What was the question, Tom? How did I find out?
How did you find out about the Portuguese ancestors of your family? How did you find out that it all started in Villa Flor in Portugal?
You know, any historical work at some level involves hypothesis. The further you go back, the more so. Data is sometimes conclusive on the surface, is not conclusive on inspection. But when Edgar Samuel, who is no longer with us, pointed out to me that the earliest Lousada in the Inquisition records appeared in Coimbra Inquisition records in 1589 and 90. They were the first ones known before appearance in the West, that is to say in Livorno. The idea formed in my mind that our descendants were indeed those first Lousadas mentioned in the records of the Portuguese Inquisition. And there's no direct proof of that. But as the story has evolved, more data has accumulated, and including a lot of work and thought as to how they left Portugal, ended up in Madrid, and then on to Livorno, Rouen, Amsterdam, and so on. And a little bit of DNA evidence as well. The idea that they started with Amador de Lousada in Vinhais in Portugal, born in 1540 in northern Portugal, that idea has gradually solidified, and is what I think actually happened. There is more work to be done. Any DNA work that I can do which pieces together the descendants left by Amador Lousada is keenly snapped up by me. I think I'm increasingly confident that in fact that was the case. But that piece of the story, Tom, has grown. It's gradually solidified in the back of my mind as all the other work was happening. But it is by no means evident that Amador Lousada in the Coimbra Inquisition records around 1590 was our ancestor. But the reason I say that is because other Lousadas also are mentioned and appear in Portugal. Other Lousadas appeared in London, a few. And it was not a trivial matter to persuade myself that indeed Amador Lousada, shoemaker of Vinhais, was in fact key ancestor, but I believe that to be the case now. Ancestors, some of his sons and offspring left Vinhais for Villafort and then Madrid, but others stayed in Vinhais, and amazingly, the family of his son appeared in the Inquisition records in Coimbra in 1650, still shoemakers in Vinhais. So that family stayed there while others left, and I think that's a common pattern as well. Sephardic families under pressure would distribute their offspring into different places to maximise future prospects, and I think that happened in this case also.
Con and I actually were just an hour ago, we were having a discussion with one of our future speakers, who was raising the point that we often seem to believe that everybody came from the northeast of Portugal, when of course there were new Christians living everywhere. My personal observation, and this is in no way scientific, but when I look around the community in London, when one goes back, almost everybody's ancestry does seem to be in the northeast of Portugal, in Bragança and Vila Flor and Vinaixa and Mogaduro and places like that. And there's, of course, maybe inadequate research on my part, or it may just be a coincidence. But I do wonder if, you know, we always talk about networks, and if perhaps the people who ended up in London were that network that originally came from the northeast. There's absolutely no science or evidence behind that statement, but I just thought to throw it out.
It's quite interesting, David. I don't think the network happened because many of the families were present in the north of Portugal. I think what I found interesting was that the only hint that I have found of the origin within Spain, and of course the object of every Sephardic genealogist is to find out your pre-Inquisition ancestors, which I've miserably failed to do. But there is a hint. There is a hint stemming from one of the Jamaican Baruch Lousadas that he came from Granada. And when you couple that with the fact that Fernando Montesinos, his ancestry is claimed to have come from Cadiz, the Enriquez Ferro family presumably came from Faro in the south. The Carvajals came from Cordoba in the south to Fermacell in Spain in the north, and then to Mogadura, and then back to Medina del Campo. There's a big movement from the south, and I thought to myself, I wonder what is going on. But of course, the Reconquista finally seized Granada in 1492, and I would like to understand more, and maybe people in our audience can comment. I think Granada would have been a much more desirable place for many Jews up to the period up to 1492 than living as new Christians in Seville, for example. Living as Jews and new Christians in places like Seville where massacres happened. Granada, Muslims, it was better to live under the Muslims than under the Catholics, perhaps. Granada might have been disproportionately the origin of Sephardic Jews. And, you know, if the Reconquista occurs, maybe there were attractions in going to not just straight across the border into Portugal, but possibly to the north. You're further away from the energetic anti-Jewish sentiments. People don't know you. So the north might well have been attractive to people from the south. So I can detect hints that people in the north are really probably to some extent representative of the remaining Jewish population in Granada. But I've seen nothing on this, and if people have got comments, I would like to see how crazy that idea is.
Well, maybe in time the genetic project that you mentioned that Michael Was is involved in, the Avatona DNA project, will find the answers, because, you know, if half the population converted, then hopefully at some point we can find matches. Gosh, we've already been an hour, so and of course it's like 4 a.m. in Australia. So before we open it up, I just wanted to return to the technology of books, because as we said before, a lot of people in here have much more knowledge than they probably believe they have. And we really hope that people can be encouraged to write it down. And it is fairly easy, obviously, to these days to just write something in Word and turn it into PDF. Just want to highlight the softwares that can be used. There's a software called Scrivener, which I've got, where essentially you just write in the software and you press a button and it can output in various formats. And you can actually, as an individual now, you can upload your work to Amazon as an ebook. You're probably not going to get very rich from it, but it is a way of preserving the work. And before the meeting, Julian, you were saying about preserving your website on, I don't think, was it archive.org or where?
Yes, archive.org. It's the Internet Archive. If that's the way it's its name. It's the same repository that it's a philanthropic funded repository of every website that appears on the internet. It's called the Internet Archive. Those who've looked at Dutch Jewish ancestry will be aware of DutchJewry.org. Went through the painful process of reformatting itself so it could be Internet archived, and indeed it was. I was a bit alarmed when that was being done because my links to DutchJewry.org were disappearing, and I had to contact the people who were doing it. It's not as easy to search as the original Dutch Jury was, but it's perfectly okay on the Internet Archive. So that is a very useful, shall we say, modern tool for archiving.
Yes. How do you actually get it archived? Is it just you go there and try and link it, or how does it work?
You go there and hit a button.
Okay. So
you go. It's pretty simple. But the trouble is, as the Dutch Jury people found, it's and this is IT technology here, which I'm not fully across, but the structure of your website has to be sufficiently simple that the way you navigate around the site has to be compatible with archive.org, the way they operate. So you have to sometimes, my website is simple in structure, but complex in content, but DutchJewry.org wasn't simple, and they had to do a lot of work to massage it so it would move across to archive.org. So there is that issue.
Great, thank you. Sorry, because we've been yakking for about an hour. If anyone has any comments or questions, including on YouTube, either in Zoom, just raise your hand, or in YouTube, please type into the text. Nothing so far on YouTube. You were saying that you were looking for somebody to a man to Y-DNA test for the Barrows. Did you say that the Lousadas have already been done, like tested?
Yes, Michael Bass asked me if I had suitable male line Lousadas, and indeed I came up with a local first cousin and an English fourth cousin. Also an American with the name misspelt Lousada. Adam Brown, after Family Tree DNA did their thing, Adam Brown came back to me and said, the American is not a male line Lousada. Well, that was an absolutely amazing revelation given his surname, but facts are facts. The Australian and the English first cousin, fourth cousin, they male line Lousadas. They were E haplotype, not uncommon in Sephardic Jews. So Adam very emphatically pointed out that Bob Lousada of Rhode Island was not a male line Lousada. Subsequently, we've had another potential male line Lousada in the US. Again, not E haplotype and a match for Bob Lousada. So that's been fascinating. We badly need some more older male line Lousadas, because with only 2 data points, we're not able. Adam's not able to trace that back to known E lineages, but we're hopeful that something will come up. The Barrows won't, of course, have a Y, male line Lousada, because they came from a female Lousada in the Livorno region. So they got Y chromosomes going back, as I said, to Simon Michael Pressburg in Vienna. So and that's going to be interesting, because that's Randy Schoenberg's ancestry. Not male line Schoenberg, of course, but it might be quite interesting. So
great, thank you. Bruce, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Julian, for taking us on the journey that you've been on. But listening to David's questions about how you wrote the book causes me to think that there could be almost a template where the chapter layout, the bookmarking in Word, hyperlinking that auto-generates an index, etc. That could be really useful as the community tries to connect the dots. If the journey, is I don't want to say it's not standardized. Everybody's family is different, but the ways to access the place names, the ways to find the family names, for example, and the conversion names, etc. If some of that could be normalized within the Sephardic genealogical, and discovery community, it might be very cool, because then you could scrape these books if they're in digital forms and make some connecting of dots. So I think you've trailblazed to the point where that makes that question, or something like that question, would make some sense. What do you think?
That's very interesting, Bruce. I mean, of course, the story of, I think, any Sephardic family divides into chunks, because each country has done its own family tree, and they need to be connected together. So there's that structure there. Unfortunately, I didn't use any fancy technology to extract the names and places, but having had some, shall we say, academic past a long time ago, I was conscious of the importance of indexes, and unfortunately, it was by hand that I picked up the names, which pages they occurred on, and places, which pages they occurred on. That's why the indexes are pretty bloody big in the book itself. I think I've got 30 pages or 20 pages of index of names and places. And look, I agree that those, I figured that they would be machine searchable, which is why I thought it was worth making the effort to do it. It wasn't very sophisticated from my point of view, but I knew it was potentially valuable to put a good index in. One cautionary note here was that the online publisher that I chose, that the way they formatted their books, they had a specific location for blank pages and title pages, blank pages, and so on. I could not make my format fit to their format. I had to reformat, which meant I had to go through the entire index's names and places to make necessary changes. And that was a very painful manual process to actually upgrade the index for small pagination differences. So yes, the whole story of the indexing in this business is an important one, but not an easy one.
As I put in the chat, the current Word can auto-index whatever you've bookmark and then auto generate how often that word or that city or whatever reoccurs in the document, and it's a great asset in that way to as you revise and things repaginate, you can update all of that and make your life easier. But I see your point, Julian. I'm really glad you did the index. Yeah.
Thank you, Bruce, for pointing that out. It's knowing that I haven't many books left in me. I wasn't certain that I was going to, I didn't know that I needed to explore such features, but if I was to do a heavy edit in the future, or if I got some significant changes, I mean, I've already had one suggestion from Abigail Green for well, it's a fairly small error I made, but if I got changes that required significant alteration of the text, I think I would look at auto index, because this would save me hours of labor of having to renumber pages in the index. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, old enough to remember, I think it was in the 1990s, maybe a bit later, when we all thought that XML formatting would resolve all this for us, and of course it never happened. But in various of the projects which are going on at the moment, including stuff that, you know, Ton and myself and the Nação Hebraica project and so forth, where we have sort of multiple different spellings of different names of you know, individuals and families and places, one would hope with at least within the next year or so that somehow as AI can, you know, intelligently pick out the words, because I think on one level, you know, I completely on board with what Bruce is saying. On the other hand, with at least with legacy technology, we would then start to lose all of the personality in the writing. But no, thank you for that, Bruce. It was interesting. Has anybody else got any questions? Let me just check on YouTube. Okay, some questions on YouTube about something completely separate, so we can leave those.
Also not in chat.
Okay, well, we've already extended a bit. Perhaps it's time to let sort of Julian go back to bed.
I think so, yes. Thank you, Julian, for joining us at this early hour in the morning. And I will remind everyone that it's winter in Australia, so it will not be light until 3 or 4 hours later. Thank you, Julian, for joining us for a talk on your book. And people can PM you or
Yes, sorry, we forgot to give a plug for the book, where to get it.
It's available online at an American company called blurb.com.
Blurb.
Blurb, yeah, blurb.com.
Maybe you can type that in.
Okay.
In chat.
Okay.
And obviously, as we were very keen to discuss this book with Julian, but we also have this hidden agenda that we hope that everyone else, even if they're not writing a book, that they can write down the guts of their research, and most importantly, share it or make plans so that, you know, when we're no longer around, that others can access the work.
So let's wrap it up.
Yes.
This was Sephardic World, brought to you by the Sephardic Genealogical Society. As always, we are grateful to our patrons, many of whom are here, who support us financially and make this possible. We thank our viewers on YouTube, and above all, we thank Julian Land for joining us early in the morning. We hope to be here again in 2 weeks' time, and we'll let you know who the speaker is and what the subject is. Thank you. A good day, everyone.